Irfan, thank you very much for joining us today. Horizon Copper is a relatively new company. It was spun out of Sandstorm Gold. And why don't we just start right there? Why were these copper assets spun out into a separate entity?
Yeah, these were non-core assets for Sandstorm. They weren't pure stream royalty, and so they were vended off to Horizon. And the idea was creating a strategic partner that would go and acquire and capitalize on the energy transition that's happening. And so Horizon is going to be acquiring copper interests, and Sandstorm is going to be helping finance those acquisitions by taking a portion of the precious metals. The beauty of copper assets is they usually come with precious metals. So in the future, you'll see Horizon acquiring these copper interests with precious metals and using the low cost of capital to help finance them. And so that allowed Horizon to come out of the gate with 3 world-class assets, one of them cash flowing in Antamina, and 2 development assets that Horizon doesn't have to go raise equity capital for in order to move forward. Plus, the way the nature of these assets were brought into place, you've got this enterprise value that is large, but the equity component of the enterprise value is small. So you've got tremendous torque. And that torque is very appealing, especially if you believe in the long-term price of copper and the play. And you've got friendly terms under the leverage with respect to no financial covenants, the negative yield on the debt. You can pay back the debt at Horizon's option, subject to Sandstorm not owning more than 34% of it at higher equity prices. And you've got this multi-billion-dollar funding partner in Horizon in Sandstorm to help move Horizon forward. So that's the backstory of what the relationship between Sandstorm and Horizon is. And Sandstorm plans on being a long-term strategic holder of that equity going forward.
And another advantage of having Sandstorm Gold as a partner is the large technical team and the corporate development team. Maybe you can just expand on this. How many members are on that team, and how many deals would they look at in any given year?
Yeah, one of the things that is critical in terms of scouring and putting placeholders on assets is being the first to identify a lot of those assets or structure deals. And so that's why Sandstorm created what we consider one of the best technical teams out there, but it's also the largest corporate development team and group. And so their job is essentially scouring the planet and looking for assets that we can put in the portfolio. And Sandstorm, over the years, I've been, involved with Sandstorm for over a decade now. They look at, in some years, over 100 transactions in 1 year alone. And so they're one of the first companies to see assets, where they're coming down the pipeline, and acquire them quickly. That's why Horizon was able to get these world-class assets, because of the transactions that Sandstorm did many years ago when no one was paying attention to a lot of these assets.
Irfan, that's a good overview of Horizon Copper and its formation. Why don't we look at Horizon's portfolio of assets, beginning with Antamina, which is a cash-flowing asset, and it's the 3rd largest copper mine in the world. It's a great cornerstone asset to hold. How were you able to secure this asset?
Yeah, Antamina, people are quite familiar with the mine. It's the 3rd largest copper mine in the world on a copper equivalent basis. It's one of those bucket list mines for mining engineers and geologists to visit. So we're really excited to have it in our portfolio. We acquired it through the acquisition of a company called Basecore, which was with Ontario Teachers Pension Fund and Glencore. The crown jewel of that portfolio was this Antamina royalty. It's a royalty that not many people are familiar with. Certainly they're familiar with the mine itself, but this royalty has cash flowed, tens of millions of dollars over many years. And we're really excited to have it in the portfolio.
And did you and your team go to site to conduct due diligence on this asset?
That's right. We were fortunate enough to go down to Peru, visit with the management team that operates it, talk about their technical vision, their planning over many decades. And it's one of those assets that, when you actually go and visit it, you see the size, the scale, and you see the support in the community as well. And it's the only technical asset that we've seen where they truly have planned over multi-generations. So this is an asset that we believe will be cash flowing for many decades to come. And so it's one where, Sandstorm was able to go use its balance sheet to help Horizon acquire it. And we're really excited to have it in our portfolio.
And so how much does this asset cash flow annually, and what does it bring to Horizon? And can the number change based on production or the copper price?
Yeah, this is going to have chunky cash flows for many years to come. Historically, it's had chunky cash flows. Sandstorm, as part of the transaction, retains a silver stream on the silver coming from it, 1.66% of the silver. The royalty is 1.66% of all production coming from Antamina. And so when you strip out the cash flows going to Sandstorm, this NPI royalty would have historically cash flowed, $10 million, even on commodity prices over the last few years below $3 copper. And when you look at, a couple of years ago when copper went on a run, that asset would have cash flowed over $20 million US to Horizon shareholders. Now we anticipate that there'll be variability in those cash flows. So in our projections, we put just over $10 million US to Horizon shareholders. But you can certainly see that when commodity prices run and other factors are in play, that this can provide very chunky cash flows to Horizon shareholders.
Another top-tier copper mine is Rio Tintos' Oyu Tolgoi mine, which is located in Mongolia. And when in full production, it will be one of the world's largest copper mines. And Horizon has an indirect interest in this mine through an ownership of Entrée Resources. Can you just explain this relationship with Entrée and what it means to Horizon?
So we own 25% of a company called Entrée Resources. They trade on the TSXV. And what they have is they have a finance carried interest on a portion of the Oyu Tolgoi ground, which, when you look at how incredible that asset is, we're really excited to have in our portfolio, especially since Rio Tinto, the operator of that asset, has just begun underground mining. So they're in the development ore on the Hugo North extension, which is essentially what we own through our indirect interest in Entrée. And so this won't be cash flowing for many years out, but when it starts cash flowing, the amount of cash flow coming back to Horizon shareholders via 25% is going to be tremendous. And it'll cash flow for many decades to come. And so we're really excited to have not only, the third largest copper mine in the world, but now the fourth largest copper mine in the world in our portfolio.
And remind me, how much of Entrée Resources does Rio Tinto own?
Rio Tinto is the other large shareholder of Entrée Resources. They own about 16%. So between us, we're the two largest shareholders in that company. And we both believe in the long-term growth of that asset on the Hugo North extension, how valuable it can be.
And I'm sorry, you might have mentioned this, but what's the timeline associated with them mining that part of the mine?
So they're in underground development ore right now. And you can see that they're very close to actually going to the Hugo North extension ground, but it'll be, many, many years before those cash flows are attributable back to Entrée share. So it's more of a long-term asset within our portfolio and our development pipeline. So if you look at our portfolio, you've got Antamina, which is cash flowing right away. You've got Hod Maden, which is another development asset, which will be cash flowing in a few years' time. And then the Oyu Tolgoi interest is years after that.
So you just mentioned Hod Maden, and I want to discuss this now. That's a copper gold project in Turkey. And you recently announced that SSR Mining has acquired an operating interest in this project. Take us through the agreement with SSR Mining and what it means for Horizon.
Yeah, this is tremendous news for Horizon shareholders, because now what you have is an asset that, as Horizon, we think is incredible, truly world-class. But now what you have is SSR Mining coming in, where they have country expertise, development teams, and they've demonstrated that they're a world-class mining operator, and they develop mines, in particular, mines in Turkey. So on the Tripler mine, which is the one they most recently developed and operated, it had tremendous success. And that development team that pushed the Tripler project forward is now being transitioned to the Hod Maden team and the Hod Maden project. So that's a wonderful news for Horizon shareholders, to have not only SSR validate that project, but also have their technical teams move it forward. Now they're going to assume the project financing that's going to undergo at Hod Maden. And for those who aren't familiar with our interest, this is this world-class asset that we own 30% of in Turkey. It's going to be project finance, about 65% debt, 35% equity. And so SSR Mining is moving through the project financing and taking over that portion of it based on the work that our other mining partner, Liddy Mid in Chile, had completed or had progressed. And now what you have is a really true world-class asset. And as Horizon shareholders, you're sitting at owning 30% with $40 million of working capital sitting on our balance sheet, which is earmarked for our equity check with respect to the equity component of that project financing. So it's a very unique story where you look at Horizon, you say, okay, yes, Antamina cash flowing, your development asset in Hod Maden, you have the equity check available to yourself to move that project forward. You also have lines of credit available with Sandstorm in case their capex overruns. And then your Oyu Tolgoi interest that you have is a finance carried interest. So it's one of those stories where you've got this incredible portfolio, but you don't have to technically raise equity in the future to move these projects forward.
Irfan, you have one cash flowing asset in Antamina, and you have two developing assets which are still a few years away from cash flowing. Would you consider buying another cash flowing asset?
Absolutely. We're really excited to add to the portfolio, become a consolidator of copper interests all over the world, and build that portfolio and create that diversification benefit. I know Sandstorm corporate development team is scouring the planet for those interests, and hopefully we'll add another one over the next 24 months.
You've already touched on this, but Horizon is a unique copper play in that it holds passive interest through royalties and also minority stakes in various copper assets. But maybe you can just summarize again, what are the benefits of this model to investors?
Yeah, I'm a big believer in diversification. And by adding more assets to the portfolio, you can get greater diversification. And you can see the benefit with our existing portfolio. You've got 3 world-class assets. Now, as you scour the planet looking for more copper plays, you add different geographic assets, different nature of deposits, and you build this portfolio, and this diversification starts to take hold. And we saw that happen in other royalty companies where they actually add an asset, you get exploration upside, and you're not too sure exactly which one of your assets is going to outperform based on the metrics you put in, but based on getting the formula right of finding quality assets with exploration upside, you can eventually get this portfolio benefit. And so that's the benefit of adding a number of different passive interests into the portfolio.
And from a valuation point of view, because Horizon Copper is not going to be a pure play royalty play, because you also will own minority interest in various assets, but how should an investor value Horizon Copper?
Yeah, certainly when you look at our portfolio today, our most material asset is Antamina, which is a royalty. You've got these other assets that are quasi-royalty, and so people see the benefit of it. But I always look at where are the cash coming out of those assets. And so when you look at Horizon, you see that the yield on a free sustaining cash flow basis, this is essentially the cash that the business is creating without you having to reinvest it into your project to continue that cash flow, as opposed to mining companies where you get cash flow in operating cash flow, but then you got to go invest it back into the business just to keep that asset alive. And so that free cash flow coming from Antamina is quite significant, and it screens incredibly well. But what you have when you look at other copper companies is this value trap of, well, it might have a nice cash yield, but they don't have growth built in. So eventually that cash disappears and your business is shrinking over time unless you go buy new assets and you go and raise equity, acquire those assets, or you move certain projects forward. What's unique about Horizon is not only you get that free cash flow coming today that has a very attractive, a sustaining cash flow yield, but you have a portfolio built in via Hod Maden and Oyu Tolgoi, where Horizon doesn't need to go raise equity to move those development assets forward. So you've got this tremendous growth built in your portfolio. And so that's very unique to have that cash flowing asset, to have a development portfolio that you don't have to go raise additional equity capital to move it forward. So it screens well in terms of not only significant growth, but significant cash flow yield. And I think we're an outlier when you combine those two together.
Irfan, as we wrap up, can you summarize for investors why they should consider Horizon as an investment and what catalysts they can expect in the coming months from Horizon Copper?
Thanks, Jimmy. I don't think there's another copper play out there when you look below $500 million where you've got 3 world-class assets coming out of the gate. You've got a cash flowing asset in Antamina that is truly world-class, and you've got 2 development assets that you don't have to go raise equity capital for to move forward, because Horizon has $40 million US working capital that's earmarked for the equity component of the Hod Maden development and build. You've got the world's best operating partners on all of those projects, from Glencore, BHP to Rio Tinto, and now SSR Mining with Hod Maden. So you've got this unique portfolio, and you've got tremendous torque and leverage. The amount of leverage that you have with Horizon Copper is incredible, in the sense that if there's a 10% increase in your enterprise value, you get over 40% return to equity holders. And that leverage normally would scare me, because I'm a finance person. It usually comes with covenants and interest rates and all these various kind of like bells and whistles that can, be scary for equity holders. But the leverage that exists in our enterprise value is on friendly terms. Negative yield, some of it's non-interest bearing. There aren't any financial coverage. You can pay back in equity. And then the last thing is you've got this long-term partner, Sandstorm, where it'll help Horizon finance future acquisitions. And that's not a small partner. That's a multi-billion-dollar entity. So when you put that all together, I think there isn't another copper play out there that has those components together.
Well, Irfan, that was a great introduction to Horizon Copper, and I want to thank you for sharing the story with us today, and we look forward to future updates.
Thanks, Jimmy. Real pleasure.